Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava, Batra, Daf, and Chet. We're going to get started, continuing with Rabbi Bena'a and get into a bunch of interesting stories about him. We saw a bunch of statements that he made yesterday about how one cannot prevent a woman from doing the laundry in the courtyard because we want to prevent them from going to do natsanua, cleaning of clothing near the river. Then we talked about men not looking at women doing that. From there, we got into what are the standards for Talmidei Chachamim, how they dress, what their table should look like. And we're going to start with what their bed should look like. Mitashel Talmidei Chachamim ketzad, kol she'en tachteha ela sandalim b'yemot hachama u'minalim b'yemot hagshami, shalam haaretz domeh le'otzar baluz, or some people have balloon. Okay, so we have a bed of Talmidei Chachamim. It should have only sandals underneath in the summer months and shoes underneath in the winter months. Standard interpretation is that sandals are the only shoes you need in the summer, and winter shoes are all you need in the winter, right? For all those who have closets full of shoes, clearly they wouldn't really approve of that. And that's all that should be under your bed. Your summer clothes should be away in the winter, and your winter clothes should be away in the summer, and shouldn't have anything under your bed. It's just messy. And the Amaretz is like an otzar balum. It's balus or balum. Okay, so Tosfos says if balus is, the Rashbam says balus is mixed up with a lot of different things. It's just a mess under their beds. That's okay. What we see is this common theme that Talmidei Chachamim were very organized and orderly, and people who are not, people the rabbis frowned upon, basically, in other words, are people who live their lives in pigsty. Now, talking about putting things in order and organizing things, Rabbi Bena'a, we're now going to see that he went about on a mission. Rabbi Bena'a v'kametzayin ma'arata. He wanted to mark all the burial caves and where people were buried, and presumably what they really wanted to know was where there are people buried, so that Kohanim know, or anyone really knows, not to pass over there, so they'll become impure, right? So this is an issue. It comes up in a bunch of sugyot about marking the graves so that everybody knows where they can walk and where they can't, and prevent themselves from becoming impure. Again, mainly for Kohanim, but also for those people who treated, who tried to keep pure all the time, which we saw there were lots of people of the Prushim who like to keep a high level of purity. So when he gets to Kimata L'Ma'arata de Avraham, he gets to the kever of Avraham, he gets to Marat Machpelah. So he sees Eliezer, servant of Avraham, standing by the door. Okay, there's a tradition, comes up in some of the sources, that there's 7 or perhaps 9 people who never really died. Eliezer's one of them, and that's why he's still alive here, to basically be standing guard on the grave. Amar Le, the burial cave. Amar Le, right? It's easier to understand if you realize these are caves and it wasn't a grave, right? Can't really block a grave, but we're talking about burial caves. That's what we said. Amar Le, my kavid Avraham. Particularly here, we're talking about Marat Machpelah, which is obviously a cave. So what is Avraham doing? Amar Le, gane bekamfa de Sarah bekamaine le beresh. He's lying in Sarah's lap, and she's looking through his head. Okay. Seems like it's a bit of a strange thing. What's actually just looking at his head, but it seems to be a romantic thing going on here. So Armalei, Zil Emale, Bena'a Kaya Bava. He says, please go tell him that Bena'a is at the door, because he wants them to, get into a position that's not this intimate position that he's kind of barging in. Armalei label says, okay, come in. But come in, why? He said, you can come in anyway, because maybe Yetzer Bahai Almaleka. There is no Yetzer in the Olam Haba. In which case, in the next world, right, where people go after their dead, there's no Yetzer Hara, which means what we're doing is not of a sexual nature or anything that's going to kind of, be inappropriate, and therefore you can come in. But despite that, okay, well, Bena'a does go in, but it says, ayin u'nafik. He went in, he looked, and he left. Now, he probably was trying not to look at Avraham, and that's why he goes so quickly. At least that's what it seems from the description here. And he immediately goes out. In other words, he does what he has to do, and he walks out very much like the women bathing. And, if you pass by and you have no choice, at least don't look, even though Avraham kind of said that, it's really fine. So now he's in Marat Machpelah. He goes now to the next grave, to Adam Arishon. יצתה בת כובע אמרה, נסתכלת בדמות תיוקני, בדיוקני עצמה אל תסתכל. Okay, you've already looked at the dmut of you can look at the dmut of someone who was made in my image, like Avraham. Some people think we're actually talking about Yaakov based on the sugya further down, but let's just assume Avraham. But you're not going to look at, the real spitting image of God. Habi, okay, so meaning you can't go into Adam Harishon's grave because he is the closest thing there is to God. Habi ina l'tziunim ha'arata. So Bena'a says, but listen, right? This is a heavenly voice. He's talking to the heavenly voice. He says, obviously, but the story is a story. Okay, let's just be clear about that, right? Some people say it's all just an allegory, right? Didn't necessarily happen. Anyway, he says back to the Bakol, but I need to go, l'tziunim ha'arata, to go measure the graves. So the Bakol, the heavenly voice, says to him, the outer one is just like the inner one, meaning the inner one is just like the outer, meaning Adam is buried on the inside, Avraham is buried on the outside, and they're exactly the same size. So you don't need to measure this, okay? And it's not clear exactly what the measurements were all about, but you don't need to come inside. Just like the one who says, two houses, one on top of the other, the one on the top is exactly the same as the one on the bottom, and here you have the same idea. This is, by the way, in Eruvin. I'm a Rabbi Bena'a. So now Rabbi Bena'a is just telling you about what happened in that episode when he went to Adam Rishon's grave and didn't end up going inside. And he didn't, right? He was supposed to not look at Adam at all, but yet, nistakalti b'shnei akeva v'domim l'shnei galgalei chama. Okay, I looked inside and I saw, in other words, I saw just his feet. Maybe they were sticking out. Okay, maybe he wasn't trying to see his feet, but he saw his 2 feet and they were like two I don't know how you translate galgalei chama, but like the sun, like 2 sun rotations, okay, or 2 sun circles, okay, it was very bright. In other words, the light that shone from just his feet, right? You can imagine what it was like, his whole body. So just to point out, Yonatan Feintuch has an article in Hebrew on it's the Gush Etzion, the Yeshivat Har Etzion website, and he points out, he was the one, by the way, who pointed out the verbs, ayil, ayin, nothing. And what he points out here is that both these stories, something happens kind of unexpected, right? Eliezer says, or Avraham says, it wasn't clear exactly who said it, you can look, it's not a problem, but yet he doesn't look. And here he's not supposed to look, and yet he does look somewhat. So something interesting about that. If you compare the beauty of Sarah, it's so great. It's like, okay, everyone compared to Sarah is like a monkey compared to a human. Sarah b'fnei Chava kikof b'fnei Adam. We're going to go through these analogies. Sarah to Chava, though, is like she was, Chava was even more beautiful. So again, the closer you get to creation, the more beautiful you are. Chava b'fnei Adam. So Chava in comparison to Adam is like kof b'fnei Adam, like a monkey to a person, and Adam b'fnei Shechina kikof b'fnei Adam. But if you compare Adam to the Shechina, right, it pales in comparison. And if we're already talking about beauty, and this actually fits with what we were talking about, the Talmidei Chachamim being organized and sanua and dressed properly and organized properly, they had tremendous beauty. Shufrei de Rav Kahana, me'en shufrei de Rabbi Abau, shufrei de Rabbi Abau, me'en shufrei de Yaakov Avinu, shufrei de Yaakov Avinu, me'en shufrei de Adam Rishon. Shufrei is beauty. The beauty of Rav Kahana was just a small percentage of the beauty of Rabbi Abau. Rabbi Abau was just a small percentage of the beauty of Yaakov Avinu, and Yaakov was just a small percentage of the beauty of Adam Harishon. Now we're going to break for a minute from the Rabbi Bena'a stories and get back to it soon. We have Rabbi Bena'a who was basically measuring graves, going in very respectfully to what he was supposed to do. And here comes a story with someone who's doing the opposite. Hahu amgosh. Okay, and amgosh is a Zoroastrian priest, okay, which was among like the Persian community, a Persian religion. And this amgosh, they have a chatit shachve. He was basically going into graves. The shachve is the graves where they rest, and he was snooping around. Okay, what seems to be, some people think the Rashbam says he was taking clothes and things out, but other people say that the Zoroastrian belief was that you have to let all the flesh decompose before you bury it. And we don't do that. And they were taking out all the graves, all the people in the graves, and they also had a missionizing kind of attitude. They want everyone to be like them. So they started going into graves, this amgosh, and taking out bodies. Okay, this was obviously for us a huge disrespect, right? Again, like I said, the opposite of what Rabbi Bena'a was doing. Himata amarata de Rav Tuvi bar Matna. So he gets to Rav Tuvi bar Matna's grave. Tafse bedikne. The one thing Yonatan Feintuch points out is that there's dikne, which is his. I'll tell you in a minute what this means, but his beard. Happens is Rav Tuvi grabs the beard of the amgosh. Okay, he's dead, but he somehow grabs the beard again. It's a story. And it sounds like diukne, right? So here, again, it's used in a disrespectful term. There it was, they were built in the image of God. And here he's kind of attacking his image of God and grabbing it and saying, you're not doing the right thing. You Zoroastrian priest, and, grabs his beard. So again, Rav Tuvi grabs the beard of this amgosh. Ata Abaye comes to defend this amgosh. Amar lebim tutaminech, please, shivke, leave him, let him go. Okay, the Rashbam says he was a friend of the amgosh. We don't really know what the story is, but for whatever reason, maybe he didn't think it was a smart idea to start getting involved with them. But so he leaves him, shivke. Okay, so l'shana acharite hadra'ata. The next year he comes, tafse b'dikne. Again, amgosh comes again, and Rav Tuvi grabs his beard. Ata Abaye, but lo shavke. Abaye comes to plead for him, and he doesn't let him go. Ada aite mispera v'gazia l'dikne. He says, until you give me scissors, and until Abaye brought scissors, and he was able to cut his beard, in which case kind of disgracing him, turning him to like an Amaretz. If someone cuts your beard, it looks very disrespectful. So he was trying to disgrace him somewhat and say, what you're doing is disgraceful, and therefore you deserve to be disgraced. I'm giving explanation. Obviously, it's not exactly clear what the story is about, but that seems to be connected. Chavita de Afra l'chabrai. Chavita de Gamre l'chabrai. Chavita de Udra l'chabrai. So there was someone who said to the sons, as he was about to die, you get a barrel of dirt, okay, earth. You get a barrel of bones, and you get a barrel of wool. That's what he said. Okay, now, nobody understood what he was talking about. Until the Kamed Rabbi Bena'a, so they come before Rabbi Bena'a, Amar lehu, Lehu ara, do you have land? Amar le'in, yes. Ilu chevata, do you have animals? Yes. Ilu bistarki, do you have sheets? They said yes. Yihachi ka'amalu, the one who gets the earth, it meant you get the land. The one who gets the bones, you get the animals because they're made of bones. And the one who gets the wool, you get the sheets because they're made of wool. And perhaps it could be, some of the commentaries say the father was saying it this way. He didn't want to get them upset. So he said something that sounded like, can you imagine if you're the one who gets all the land and someone else gets all the sheets, the one who gets the sheets could be very upset. But when you say it in that term, those terms doesn't really sound so terrible. It sounds like you're all getting kind of nothing. So no one could get upset while he was still alive till they went and figured out what he meant. Hahu gavra deshama ledebitu deka'amar lebarte. Okay, now we hear a woman saying to her daughter, there was a guy. Okay, let's start with the guy. There was a man who was the husband who heard his wife say to the daughter this crazy line, Amai lo tzniat b'isur. Why are you not secretive about your licentious behavior? Okay, you're out there sleeping around with lots of men and probably you're married. And why are you doing it publicly? You should be secretive about it. Okay, now she should be saying you shouldn't be doing it at all. But instead she says you should be secretive about it. And in fact, she says, take example from me. Ha itita asara b'nei ila. I have 10 sons. And you know what? I only have one from your father. Okay, none of them are really my legitimate sons. His legitimate sons, other than one. Okay, because I slept around. But he has no idea. Now, remember how the story started. Started with this man listening to this conversation between his wife and his daughters. All of a sudden, the father hears this, that he's the father of only one of the children. The problem is he didn't know who was his real child. Kishchev, when he died, Amar Lahu, he said to the children, Kol nechsad lecha bara. All of my property is going to one of the sons, but he didn't say which one because he didn't know which one. Lo yadeh lehi b'nai. They didn't know, so after he died, they had no idea which son he was talking about. Atu the kamed Rabbi Bena'a, so they go before Rabbi Bena'a. Amar Lahu, zilu chavutu kivra da'avukon, ad dekayim magale lechu lehi minai shavka. Very interesting. Rabbi Bena'a says, go and hit on the grave of your father until he tells you which one. And this is a bit of a strange thing to do. We already heard that the father didn't know, but maybe they didn't know that. And Rabbi Bena'a was so particular about marking the graves, all of a sudden is saying something to hit on the grave. Seems a little bit strange. Well, let's see why he said this. Azukulu, ahu dabre. Azukulu, ahu dibre, havalo, azukulu, ahu dibre, havalo azil. But okay, so they all went, but there was one of the sons, that's Bere, one of the sons that didn't go. Okay. Amar lahu, kulu nichsedaha. So Rabbi Bena'a says, all of them go to that one son. Why? This is like the Shlomo HaMelech story. By doing this kind of thing, he was able to figure out who was the real one. Because the one who had this inherent sense of, I'm not going to go bang on my father's grave, that's disgraceful. It relates to Rabbi Bena'a about treating the graves with the utmost respect, understood that this was not the way to go do it, and he didn't do it. Still have to wonder why he told other people to do it. And in the meantime, there were 9 sons hitting on the grave of their father, but still it was a way to identify who is the true son. But the story continues. So in the end, he rules that all the money is going to go to this one son. Well, the other brothers were very up in arms. They didn't get any money. They said, we're going to tattletale on him. 2, that's Achlu courts, that means we're going to go tell on the Bein Malka, to the Malchut, to the foreign authorities. We're going to turn in this Rabbi Bena'a because of what he did. Amre, Ika, so what they say? They said, Ika Chad be Yehuda, there's Ika Gavra Chad, there's one guy in Yehuda, in Judea, of the Jews, really it means. He's taking money out of people's hands, meaning he robbed us of our money without witnesses, without anything, basically. So they put him in jail. So Rabbi Bena'a is now sitting in jail. Azla debitu, his wife comes in, and his wife is one of these wise women, and she says, I have a way to get my husband out of jail. What does she do? Amar lahu, she goes to them and she says, it sounds very much like the story in David with Bathsheba. So after Natan, David comes and gives David a mashal of, there's a man who has only one sheep, whereas there's another man who has lots, and this man took away the one little sheep that the poor man had. So she kind of says a bit of a similar story. You can see that these stories are bringing references to all these Tanakh stories, particularly this one's going to move to Yosef in a minute. So what happens? She says, Avdachad havali. I had one slave. They cut his head and they took off his skin. And they ate his meat flesh. And then they took the skin and they turned it into like a flask. We always had they always talk about flasks made of leather, and they then had everybody drink from it. And they gave me nothing for it. They didn't pay me for it, even though this was my slave. They had no understanding at all of what she was talking about. Amre, they said, like the Yosef story, now Rabbi Bena'a is in jail. They said, let's bring up the wise Jew, and he'll tell us what this means. Karyula Rabbi Bena'a. Okay, so first they don't say it in his name, but they say, let's find a wise Jew, and they look and they see Rabbi Bena'a is in jail, let's ask him. Amar lahu, Zarnuka Amar lahu. She was really talking about, it was a metaphor for her sheep. She had a sheep, and they slaughtered him, ate the meat, took the hide, and made it into a canteen, and didn't pay her at all. Amre, they said, wow, because you're so wise, right? Just like the Yosef story. We want to bring you in to be a judge. So come, be a judge, and judge our people. Chaza, which by the way was interesting because he also judged in the previous, right? The story with the sons, the whole way he got into jail was by ruling, by creating a judgment, but then they realized that perhaps it was a way that they realized he must have been right in the first place. Possible. So now, right, it's not clear that they understood the whole story and what had happened, but maybe they did, and maybe they're realizing that maybe he really was right from the beginning. So now, when he goes to the courthouse, he sees the following thing. He sees on the gates that it says, Kol dayan de mitkare ledin lo shmaya dayan. Any judge who is called to judgment about something, meaning people accused him of something, which is exactly Rabbi Bena'a. He was accused of stealing people's money. Lo shmei dayan is not a judge, because if he was accused of taking money of somebody else, well, then maybe he'll take bribes. So that's not a good judge. Amar lehu, he says to them, I don't like your sign. Elameata, ata inish me'alman, he's basically talking about himself. A random person's going to come, umaz min lehu ledina, and pasle. Any random person can basically disqualify a judge very simply by just bringing up false charges against them. So you're creating a situation by having this sign where you can basically just easily kick judges out of the court system, because anyone who comes and accuses without witnesses, without anything, can build a case for with nothing, and the judge is going to be knocked out. Ella, he says, you really should write, Kol dayan demitkari ledin, umavkan mamona bedin, lav shmei dayan. Anyone who gets called to judgment and they actually take money out of him, meaning he's convicted or she's convicted, probably in those days it was only males who were dayanim, lav shmei dayan, cannot call themselves a judge. So they hear what he says. What did they do? Very interesting solution. Katvu hachi. Biram, they didn't want to change their sign, so they left up their sign. And after his words, they wrote, Biram sabi diudai amre, but you know, the elder Jewish people say, Kol dayan demitkari ledin umavka mine mamona bedin lav shmei dayan. So they put up what he said, but as an added line. Just so you know, right, we're not willing to change what we have. What we have, but we'll add your line in the name of the Jews. Another sign he happened to notice while he was there. Berosh kol mota anadam. Behind every death is me, blood. Okay, blood is the source of every death, which really means by not bloodletting, you cause yourself to die. Okay, having too much blood in your body, that's what they believed in those days. Having too much blood in your body is what causes, it's the cause of all death. You can see where this is going, because this is not fully true, right? There's other reasons people die. Berosh kol chayin anachama. And in front of the main way people survive is by wine. Okay, wine is basically the medicine it's a cure all. Okay, and it's said in the name, I am wine, right? Me, I, wine. Okay, wine is the cure all. So Elameata comes from Rabbi Bena'a and says, what about someone who falls from the roof and dies? They didn't die because they didn't bloodlet. They could have bloodlet the day before and then fallen off the roof and died. Or you fall off a palm tree and die. Demarcate, the blood is not what kills him. Vitu, min demarcate lemema, mashkule chamra v'chaye. Someone who's about to die, what? If wine is the cure-all, you're going to give him wine, it's not going to die? That's not true. Ella hachi. This is what you should write. Berosh kol marin anadam, berosh kol asvin anachamra. Okay, for any, 1 second, right. Any disease that's going to come, it's blood. In other words, if you have a disease and you die on a disease and not in a tragic accident, but you die from disease, they don't mention also war, sword, things like that. But any disease, this basically rules out all those things. Any disease is blood, and any cure for, right, like the best of the cures is wine, then you won't, like, if you drink wine, the Rashbam says, it's a preventative method. They believed wine was very healthy, and it would prevent you from disease, obviously. If you drink all the time, it's really bad for your body, but I assume they mean in moderation. Ella, so therefore that's what you should write. So what did they do? Again, they just added Biram, Sabid Yudai Amre, Berosh Kol Marin Anadam, Berosh Kol Asvan Anachama. Okay, and then they basically wrote what he said, but they added the following thing. Not clear why they added it. Ba'atar de Lake Chamar, Tamar Mitabu Samani. If you don't have wine, though, there's all sorts of herbs that you can use as cures. Okay, it's not the only thing. And one last sign, and then we'll end this section. Ktiv apitra de kapotia, in kapotia, which seems to be in Asia Minor, in Turkey of today. Anpak, anbag, antal. Okay, ve'ezu antal, and what is antal? Zeu revi'it shel Torah. This is a quarter lobe, which is always the measurement of the Torah of liquid measurement. So the Rashbam says, Anpak, Ambag, and Antal are all measures, and they're all one and the same, and that's what this is telling you, and they're all the shiur of a quarter of a log. Some people say that Anpak and Ambag are remedies, and the amount that you're supposed to take of them is Antal, and that's a revi'it of them. And that it's talking about remedies, which connects it a little bit better, although it is connected because it was a sign, although it's not a sign that he changes. It's a little bit strange why this is here. Okay, before we get on to the next Mishnah, I want to try to think a little bit about the sugya. It needs a lot more thought as to what's going on here. Again, I'll talk about some themes that come up. And again, some of this is taken from that article of Yonatan Feintuch. Some of it is just my own thinking while reading the article and thinking about this. So yeah, again, we have this issue of organization. We have the shulchan, the mitah, the dress, right? The three things: how you dress, how you eat, and how you sleep, your bed, right? Even though it's not really time about sleep, but it's, it's time about your bed and how that's organized. And then we get to Rabbi Bena'a. Besides, he's on to organization. He then goes and organizes the graves. We have the issue of aesthetics, okay, and which go together really with tzniut. Tzniut and aesthetics are equated, right? Some people think, oh, if you're going to dress tzanua, it's not going to be aesthetic. He's saying the exact opposite. Aesthetics are in tzniut, right? And then we have the tzniut by the laundry. We have the tzniut of how the Talmid Chacham dresses. We have the tzniut of Avraham and Sarah. We have the beauty of all the different people and comparing their beauty. And really, I think what they're getting at, and this whole connection of the diukan of God and how humans are basically the representatives of God in this world. And within the humans being the representatives of God in this world, and that's really what you see from these stories, is, or particularly the Adam HaRishon story, that the Talmidei Chachamim are the representatives of God in our generation. And therefore, they have a high standard to live up to because they're representing God. People are going to look at them, right? And people have to see what you would expect to see if you see God. Right? That's a very high standard to live up to. But I think there's a lot of connection here about the way you look and what you represent. And that's why the amgosh had to have his beard cut off, because his looks had to expose who he really was, right? Like the picture of Dorian Gray in the whole story where, he does evil things, but you don't see it in his face. And it's very important that he cut off his beard so that everyone knows that this is a no good person and he's doing things to disgrace the human, right, dead bodies of people. And that was really, not acceptable. And that had to show in his look. Okay, so that I think has a lot to do with it. Then we had these people who were hiding things, right? And Rabbi Bena'a has them come out to the surface, right? And he tries to bring good into the world and tries to bring justice into the world. And he tries to, right? And his wife was able to kind of show that, right? First of all, you see the beautiful relationship they had, that she was able to, without communicating with him, right? They understood each other. And he was able, right? If you talk about, there's a bunch of things about relationships in these sections, about, Avraham and Sarah and him lying on her lap, and this beautiful image of them. And you have the opposite of the woman who basically cheated on her husband and lied to him and didn't tell him the truth, and then you have this beautiful relationship where they're so in sync and they understand each other without saying anything. Whereas the husband didn't figure anything out until the wife started talking about it to the daughter, and then the husband heard what she had to say and realized what the truth was, right? So Rabbi Bena'a is all out there. He's honest. He's right the opposite of this judge that they think is not honest, dishonest. He gets himself put in jail anyway, but because he's doing the right thing, he's able to see through. He's able to understand things that aren't said. He's able to figure out, okay? And it's contrasting it with judges that are corrupt. And it's all about, going in the right direction, going in the wrong direction. If you think about what this all connects with Masechet, I think there's an issue. If you think about it, we've been talking about people being in other people's boundaries. First of all, trying to bring the truth to light. Somebody's lying in these cases, right? People, designating boundaries, first of all, for sure that's connected. Of designating who lives where and where are the boundaries, that's exactly what he was doing with the graves. Like being in people's space without permission, it's also, he goes into the graves, and what does he do? He knocks, right? And he makes sure he can go in, right? He's told he can't go in. Well, he looked a little, right? There's also the looking. You shouldn't look at things you're not supposed to look at, the privacy issues. We seem to have a lot of themes of issues that we've been discussing. And I think it's also interesting that this whole thing about them writing their original rule and then him changing it, and then they say, well, we're not going to fully change it, we're going to put them both up. I think there's a concept here of really what our Masechet is about in general. There's no real clear-cut rules here. Like, we're going to give guidelines or we're going to give rules, but we understand that, remember, none of this has a basis in the Torah, and there's a lot of room for interpretation, and there's a lot of room for the rabbis to kind of come up with what they think the definition should be. And we understand there's these opinions, there's those opinions, and that's kind of what happened here. Like, we think this, you think that, we'll put it up, but it's not so clear cut, and things aren't so black and white like they might seem. And that's, I think, another theme that comes up here. Okay, with those thoughts, it's not fully clear cut, but I think there's a lot of themes that we can talk about here that relate to what we've been learning. And now we're going to get started with the next Mishnah. Hamarzev en lo chazaka v'yesh limkomo chazaka. Okay, there's a marzev and a maschila. The maschila is really the gutter. Okay, it's the thing that goes around the rim of your roof. And then there's a pipe that leads out from the gutter and dumps the water into the garden or the courtyard, which is going to be here a shared courtyard, or maybe someone else's courtyard. So now we have a marzev. So that's the pipe that comes down. You can't create a chazaka with that. It's not such a solid. It's not like it's there, and once it's there, you can always dump it into your neighbor's garden. But it does have limikomo. Its place has a chazaka. We don't yet know what that means. We're going to have to do 3 explanations in the Gemara what it means. So hold off. Mazchila, though, which is much more serious and set there in the roof. Yesh la chazaka. Well, if your neighbor didn't complain, now there's a whole debate. Didn't complain after immediately, didn't complain after 30 days, or didn't complain after 3 years. It's a whole range of opinions among the Rishonim about what we're talking about. But either which way, if there wasn't a protest after X amount of time, you can assume that they let it go. Sulam ha-mitzri ein lo chazaka, but litzuri yesh lo chazaka. Sulam ha-mitzri doesn't have 4 rungs. It's only 3 rungs. It's very small and temporary. Tzuri is a very solid one. If you keep your ladder in someone's courtyard, then you have a chazaka on it. Okay, meaning you can leave it there. 1 second, right? So in other words, if no one complains that you put the ladder there, then it's small. We don't assume that they were expected to complain. If it's big, we would have assumed they would have complained. If you have an Egyptian window, it doesn't have a chazaka. But a tsuri from Tzul, okay, this is all, by the way, from Tzur in Lebanon. But if it's the tsuri one, yesh la chazaka. Now, chalon mitzri, Egyptian window, is very small, and the tsuri is very big. So now there's a big debate what it means it has a chazaka or doesn't have a chazaka. Does it mean that a person can't put a wall opposite and block the light from coming in? And we worried about that. And since it's such a small window, there's not that much light coming in anyway, and therefore it doesn't really matter. But a big one, yes, there is. And that means the other neighbor can't put a wall there. Or does it mean that you have to actually cover the wall, and we're worried about privacy? We're worried if you have a window and the person's house is right there, you might look into their house. So if it's a small window, you could barely see through, then we leave it. But if it's a big window, then you're going to look into your neighbor's property, and they don't want that. So they might make you block off your window. So there's a debate whether it means they can't build a wall or you have to block your window. So what's the size of this teeny little window? If you can't put your head through, then that's chalon mitzri. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, if it has a frame around it, even if it's really little, that's already a much more permanent kind of window. And then your neighbor, according to Rabbi Yehuda, then again, the neighbor can say, you don't have a chazaka. If the neighbor didn't complain, they should have, and therefore, because it's something more permanent, and therefore you can create a chazaka with that. So now the Gemara asks, and that's what we're going to finish up today. What does that mean? So I'm a Rabbi Yehuda, I'm a Shmuel, first interpretation, hachi kamar. And there's a lot of different ways to understand this. I'm going to read it in one manner. Which means on that side of the roof, you can move the pipe with the water dripping out. If the neighbor, it's dripping on the neighbor's courtyard, the neighbor can move it to the other side on that same side, okay? So you can't create a chazaka that it has to stay in this place. They can move it over anywhere on that side. But yesh limkomo chazaka mishtei ruchot. But yesh limkomo chazaka means it's stable on that side, meaning you can't move it to a different side. If it's on the south side, you can't put it on the east side of the house or the north side of the house. It stays over there. The neighbor can't insist that you move it sides, because that's already like a whole construction thing you have to change. Rabbi Chanina, different interpretation. Okay, so if it was long, you could cut it short. But you can't get rid of it entirely. You could just shorten it. Not sure why you would want to shorten it and what that would help. But you can shorten it, you just can't take it out entirely. Rabbi Yomi there's no chazaka, meaning where it dumps out, you don't own the property underneath. So if your neighbor who owns the courtyard underneath wants to build there, they can build whatever they want there. You don't have rights to where it's dropping down. But they can't get rid of your gutter, the pipe that's leading down. So that's a third interpretation. Okay, so what we did today is we finished up we saw a slew of stories of Rabbi Bena'a and his visiting graves, his being a judge, and then when he got put in jail and then taken out, just like Yosef, and becomes the judge in this Gentile nation, and then has all these comments about their signs and what their expectations of judges are, and cures and remedies and diseases, etc. And again, what he really didn't like, and this is, maybe I didn't say this clearly enough before, he didn't like that everything for them was black and white. And he's saying things are not black and white. And that's what I was really saying about this Masechet. Determining who gets what and how we divide and all that is not so black and white. And that's what it's really, as is most of halacha. We try to kind of have rules, but in the end, it's really not black and white. And then from there, we got to these parts of houses, where it's the pipe coming with the water coming from the gutter itself, the windows, right? What of them creates a chazaka, what doesn't create a chazaka? And then we have three interpretations of this first line about the Merzev doesn't have a chazaka, but its place has a chazaka. What possibly could that mean? We gave three interpretations, but that will finish for today. Wishing everyone a good day.